Hey, we're going to be doing a tutorial for Typography Project 3, but essentially we're going to be working with creating some modular letter forms. So I'm going to just bring up that PDF for you guys so that we can review it really quickly. This particular project and reading is kind of focused on Futura quite a bit. But in general, I thought it'd be a really good exercise for you guys to just kind of develop some letters, but not necessarily expressive, although that's not quite true. They are expressive, but they're just not hand lettering methods that we'll be using. Instead, we're going to be relying on a grid system or some type of a modular system to kind of guide us. The actual project synopsis, create one document, and the size may vary dependent on the number of letters for the word that you choose or your name, that represents a prototype for a bitmap typeface of your name. So I think I'll definitely be doing either Matt or Matthew today. But the other option is sometimes folks don't want to use their name, or they want to do something else. So the other option is to use or choose a word that quote unquote represents you. So that might be an expressive aspect of this project that you could explore, which I encourage you to do, because typography is visual communication and expression. So design your letters within a system of squares or dots or a combination of the two. I actually might be using these triangulated structural forms to work with mine, but I haven't decided yet. I'm just going to run with this project and do it intuitively today with y'all to give you an example of how to move forward. Substitute the curves and diagonals of the traditional letter forms with gridded and rectilinear elements. Avoid making detailed staircases, quote unquote, which are just curves and diagonals in disguise. For additional inspiration, research and explore the following artist designer. And actually I gave you two, Paul Renner, who is the designer of Futura, and I also gave you visual artist Barbara Kruger to investigate, because you can kind of see from some of these examples down a little further down where Barbara Kruger is using Futura in a lot of her work. And of course, the power politically and socially of visual communication and typography. Okay, so yeah, you do need Adobe Illustrator software to get going with things today. So we don't need this anymore, but I am going to fire up Illustrator. I love Illustrator. I love the vector graphics. I love using the pen tool and kind of shaping and forming ideas and graphics with this software program. It's very, very powerful. I'm not exactly sure what dimensions I'm going to need, but I think that I'm going to just start with a simple, I'm just going to start with a simple 11 by 8.5 inch artboard. I only need one artboard for now. I can create another one if I need to later. I do want it to be CMYK, and I want the raster effects to be high quality. 300 PPI or DPI is print quality, by the way. So that's the standard if you want to print things. And you can always export and reduce that quality later down the road. So I think it's a better idea to start with a higher quality or a professional quality and then reduce later if necessary. So hit create. And there you go. So I'm going to blow up this software screen so that we can see this a little bit more clearly. And I'm also going to turn on the grid. You can do that manually with your keyboard. Or, of course, you can come up here to View, Show Grid. And that's really important for this project because we are working to create a sort of modular system. And we're going to be relying on these modular grids and the subdivisions of these 1-inch grids to kind of guide us. And so we're going to get going with that here in a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to start simple, and I'm just going to use the word matte, M-A-T-T. But I think what I want to do is I also want to, we have the grid is engaged, it's on, we can see it, but we also want snapped grid to be on, okay? And so now we know it's on because there's a little checkbox next door. This is really important because see how if we try to create an object, it's going to snap to that grid. Real nice and beautiful. I love the grid. You'll probably hear me say that in every single tutorial that I give. I love the grid because it's a reliable co-pilot. Somehow I always think, I know it's sort of cheesy and I use cinematic references as well constantly. But if I were to use one in this circumstance, it would be Top Gun, and then I'm Maverick, and Goose is the grid, okay? So yeah, they're in the, never mind that Goose falls out of the plane at some point in that movie, that's not the point. But yeah, you need a co-pilot, and the grid is a good co-pilot. So yeah, see how we can move things around, and these objects are going to talk to the grid. You can actually change the grid subdivisions as well. In Illustrator, you go to Preferences, and you can come over here to Guides and Grid. And right now, subdivisions are set to 8. So it's a good idea to stay within this increment, 1 inch, because that's standardized, right? But you could actually have 16 subdivisions. So you could have 1/16 of an inch for each of these 1-inch grid marks. And you can kind of see how this line is a little bit thicker compared to the rest, or these subdivisions. But that could possibly be handy dependent on the project that you're doing. For this particular project, I think that's overkill, to be perfectly honest, especially since we're trying to do sort of a bitmap version of a typeface. So I'm going to go back to Guides and Grid, and I'm going to change this back to 8 because I think that's plenty, in my opinion. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my type tool in Illustrator. I'm going to drag, and see it's already populating with our old friend lorem ipsum placeholder text, but I don't want to do that. I just want it to say M-A-T-T, and I need to bump this up a little bit so we can come up here to top. Look what happens too. So when I select the object, these parameters appear that could be useful. So, you know, these Adobe applications, they're constantly changing dependent on what you have selected, but it's all very user-based, and you know, they've been refining these software applications for years and years and years to essentially make it easier to do, and in my mind, easier to learn. So if you're familiar with one Adobe application, you're probably going to be able to pick up these other applications relatively quickly. You just need the experience and the time in front of the screen to kind of get a handle on things. I push that a lot in all of the courses that I teach. That being said, I need to pump up the typeface size from 12. That's not nearly good enough. In fact, I don't even think that's good enough. And see what I just did there is I selected the object, and then I double clicked and I dove into the object. I selected the typeface, and now I'm actually, I can't stand myriad. It's just not my thing. And you'll get accustomed to typefaces that you like as you're designing. Obviously Helvetica is a problem solver, but just for the purpose of this particular project, I'm going to see if I can find Futura in here. You may or may not have Futura loaded on your machine. That's not the end of the world. So just keep that in mind. I still need this typeface to be a little bit bigger, but although down here, 72, you would think that's the largest it's going to go, but you can type in here and say, okay, I want it to be 200, or I want it to be 250. Okay, and I'm actually going to leave, well, I'm going to bump it up just a little bit. See, I'm just kind of using my intuition a bit. I think 300 is appropriate. So we did go outside of the object box parameters, and look, we can move it around. We can with our black arrow tool, we can select. And see, we can even dive back into that object and hit Command A for select all. I'm going to center it. I think that's going to help me. And then what I'm going to do is, because I like consistency, I want a little bit of padding. There we go. So the next thing, oops, just testing a theory there. Sorry, folks. So I'm going to move this on center. Okay. And I'm kind of surprised. It looks like smart guides are enabled, but this is something else to keep in mind. When you have snapped grid on, smart guides kind of take a back seat, which is kind of unfortunate when you're doing something like what I was just doing. Usually if I'm using my my left hand and I'm holding shift. So if I don't hold shift while I'm moving this object with my left hand pinky, that basically means it can go anywhere. But if I hold shift, look at, it's kind of like locked into place in a sense. So it's kind of handy for just moving things up or down or left and right conveniently. So anyway, where I was going with that was that if I turn off snap to grid temporarily, it is doing it, or that's kind of irking me. It's not actually doing it right now. But you see that smart guide that is enabled. Ah, there it goes. So now it's giving me hints that things are intersecting or quote unquote on center. So smart guides are really, really handy, but sometimes you have to toggle snapped grid on and off to get those advantages. So the next thing I'm going to do is, whoops. Oh, that's actually a good reminder. I need to save this document, right? So I hit Command S, the shortcut, and now it's saying, well, where do you want it? And of course, I have a project folder set up, and as you should as well. Teaching, archive, courses, typography 1, and what do you know? There it is. And I'm going to throw this into the assets folder, okay? And I'm also going to call it modular for now. Okay, and of course, just format, we want it to be an Illustrator file, of course. Save. Yeah, everything looks good to me. Hit OK. So now if the application crashes, no crocodile tears here. All we have to do is save often, and if anything catastrophic occurs, then we just reload the document. But yeah, I end up saying this to students a lot as well. If you're not saving your work and then you come to me later and say, well, my document crashed, I'm going to just say, well, you know, live and learn. You know, you got to protect your documents. You got to protect the time invested into your project. And if it crashes and you haven't saved, well, that's on you. But you got to move on. Double click into the object, and what I want to do right now is I actually want to play with the kerning. In InDesign, it's a little bit, you know, it's easier to play with typeface kerning because the options are just available to you right off the bat. But if I'm not mistaken, character, here we go. So this is the kerning option right here. They call it tracking as well. So you can increase the kerning here. Let's just type in 25. And see how there's more spacing in between those letters now? I can go back, and again, the only way that I can do that is if I dive into this, because if I just select it once with the black arrow tool, it's an object. If I dive in to that object and I hit Command A and select the letters, then I can go in and adjust the kerning for the selection. So I can change this to even 50. And of course, sometimes you change the kerning so much that it's going to push some letters outside of the bounding box, and you're going to get this little red dot. And we don't want that, of course. So I'm going to hit Command Z for undo. I actually think that's pretty good. I'm going to bump this up to 75. I'm curious if it'll work. It looked like it did. 75, yep, okay. I think that's a good place to start. Now, we kind of want to separate out these letters so that they kind of, I want these letters to talk to the grid, to have a relationship with the grid, so that we can set up a system to kind of develop a bitmap rendition or interpretation of this typeface. And it could be any typeface. Again, I chose Futura just because I love Barbara Kruger, but it could be any typeface. So what do we do now? Well, I don't want to work with this, I guess, bounding box, this text bounding box that's sort of holding all of these letters. And again, you know, all this spacing, all of this arrangement is designed by the typographer, and that's why we're using it kind of as a precedent, as a place to start. So the next thing that I would do is I would select this object, and I would come up here to Object, and I would hit Expand. And as soon as I hit Expand, it's going to say, okay, you want to expand the object and the fill. Absolutely okay. So now look at this. Now it's an object. So previously when I would use the black arrow tool and select this object, it would tell me that it was actually a text object that you could edit. But now it's just interpreting it as an object, just the same way that black square that I just made is an object that can be moved around. Okay, so now these are just vector forms. Unfortunately, these are still grouped together, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this vector object that represents the typeface, and I'm going to ungroup. So I've already expanded, I already did that business, right? Now I need to ungroup. Ungroup, and usually I say ungroup until ungroup is no longer a highlighted option, and see ungroup has gone away, which essentially means if we use the black arrow tool and click away, now we can click M individually. And each of these letters are unique, autonomous vector forms, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to set up, well, I mean, look at the width of this M compared to the width of this T. I wonder if we should just leave it as is. I mean, I was thinking that I could put each of these on a separate artboard. So for example, and I'm just going to do it up above, just to kind of show you, okay? And by the way, the Artboard Tool is here on your left-hand side. You can select this Artboard Tool, and I like to have Snap to Grid enabled, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this artboard, or make an artboard rather, and I want it to be, I'm going to go with, oops, 4 by 4 inches, and you can see the dimensions that are being spec'd up here, okay? I don't even think that, and I'm going to copy an M. Just Command C, Command V, and now look at that. Woohoo! And this is just a different approach that you might take for this project. I don't know. So anyway, I know that's going to work. So now I'm actually going to select this artboard, and notice with the artboard tool selected, I can cruise around and I can select different artboards that are associated with this project. And even here it says Artboard 1, Artboard 2. So you can create multiple artboards within Illustrator, which is really handy. But I need 4 artboards to make this work. So I'm going to go back to this one, and what I'm going to do, if I remember correctly, if I take my pinky and hold down Option on a Mac, look what happens. 1, 2, 3. So now I've got 4 unique artboards for a slightly different approach to this project, okay? So now I need to put an M up there. I need to Command C and Command V to make some copies of these letter forms. And I'm going to put each of them on their own artboard. But look at, I mean, it just doesn't look right. I mean, my OCD is kicking in, and I'm going to use the arrow tools to toggle these artboards around, or you can just drag. And sometimes it's a little bit finicky. So I'm going to kind of nestle it there, and then I'm going to use my letter keys to kind of put it in place. Notice how the content on that artboard is moving with the artboard as I nudge it around as well. Okay, well, I mean, that's a good start. I want these letter forms to be on center with that particular artboard. Well, okay, so let's use one of our palettes. Let's go over here. Gosh darn it, align is what we're looking for. There it is. Okay, so we have a line, but of course we need to align to the artboard. So I'm going to select this artboard, select the object, and then book. Now it's right on center. Book. 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 Okay, all of those are right smack in the middle. It may not be exactly, you know, obviously we've really kind of messed with the design and intent that the typographer had with this version. So I'll let you guys decide how you want to do it, but kind of keep in mind the difference with how these letters are aligning with the grid that we're basically, that we're going to be looking for Goose's advice here within this project because the grid is our co-pilot. Okay. Again, that metaphor. I do think that it's important that, and I'm going to turn off snap to grid again. All right. Because I feel like I'm going to hold shift and kind of nudge this typeface around a little bit because I honestly want the typeface to be there, the bottom talking to essentially where a subdivided grid is splitting into, or you know, that edge rather. Obviously it's falling below here, that's okay. So just kind of use your intuition and nudge, and I'm holding shift again too, by the way. And you can see those smart guides working really beautifully. It's helping you to position things possibly. But I want this part of the typeface to fall below. To me, this is the base that I'm concerned about. That's perfect right there. Do the same thing. And oh, by the way, you can use guides to do this too. So if you hit Command R to make your ruler appear, you can just come up here with your black arrow tool and drag a guide down. Now, unfortunately, that guide is not talking to the grid right now. So again, it's this constant back and forth. There we go. Now we got a guide. Look at this. Woo! Now that's not quite there. We can go and make that a little bit better. So now we have a guide that's going to help us just a little bit. But I got to turn snap to grid off again. Okay, so again, it's a little bit cumbersome, but you know, it's just the way of the world. Deal with it. Boom. Okay, and I think let's zoom in and deal with this M appropriately because I want it to be perfect. I like things perfect. In fact, that's why I like Illustrator, because I can attempt to get things perfect. How's that? Woo. Good. I think it's time to save so that we don't lose any work or information. Command S. The other thing that I'm going to do next is actually I'm going to, first of all, I need to be able to see behind these letter forms. I need to be able to see the grid, and I need to be able to see what is happening on top. So I need some transparency. So I'm going to select all of these letter forms, and I'm going to change the opacity. By the way, look what happens if I click away. You know, this is the default information at the top. But if I select these objects, I start to get additional options, et cetera, and information. One of those is opacity. I'm going to change opacity to 50, if not even, gosh, maybe 25 might be better. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. 25 opacity. It's looking really interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to name this layer. Let's just call it original. Naming your layers intuitively is helpful, but obviously I need another layer to work on, because now see the negative sign or whatever that I'm getting there. That means I can't do anything on that layer because I've locked it down. I need to create a new layer. I'm going to put it on top. In fact, I'm also going to choose a different color. I don't know. I want to use cyan. I love like pure CMYK colors. Cyan and magenta to me are just incredible. That being said, now, okay, what are we going to do here? We've got the grid kind of there. You know, I'm going to suggest that we just start. You got to figure out the size of the bitmap subdivisions that you're going to be using. And it's going to be different. You're going to have to use your intuitive gut. You got to listen to your gut in this game of design quite a bit. By the way, I think that we should have adjusted these letter forms so that the bottom is talking to the grid more closely. So we got to back up. We got to unlock this layer. Good Lord. Now we got to back up. All right. We got to turn on. No, we got to keep it organic. But again, I want this guy. Yeah. Just get everything in alignment with the bottom of that grid, or that separation, that edge, that line. And again, you know what we're laying out here? It's a guide. We haven't even started doing the work yet. We're just setting up the document. And a lot of that, of course, takes a little bit of planning and thinking ahead, and possibly a sketch. For the purpose of this project, I'm doing a lot of the sketching directly within the software. You know, the software does a lot of sketching and thinking as well. For my projects, I do ask that you document that process a little bit. And what you can do is you can just take screenshots. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, whatever. You can take screenshots to show me what you were up to and what you were learning. Okay, so we're pretty much set. I need to lock this layer down as well again. And again, you can make it appear and disappear on the layers palette. But, I'm going to trust the process. I'm going to trust the grid. I have a lot of trust in Goose, my co-pilot, to guide me towards doing something worthwhile here. And I did want it centered, and I'm just going to go with it. I'm just going to see what happens. Now the question is, do I want to use a 1/4 inch grid, an 1/8 inch grid, or a 1/2 inch grid? And so let's just kind of, I don't know, let's select the layer that we're supposed to be doing some work on. Oh, we got to turn on snap to grid again, right? Okay, so here, whoops, I don't think that's quite right. And you know how we know? We can look up here, and that's an 1/8 inch. So sometimes we can just kind of correct things manually. And we might have to reposition, but look at that. That is a perfect 1/8 inch square. No, it isn't. I thought it looked off. Look at what happened here. Okay, that's, you know why? It's because this link thing is on. And so we can unlink that. There we go. Now that is a perfect square. That looks right visually. My intuition was telling me, nope, that's not a square. That's not a perfect square. And indeed, it was not. Okay, so I want to change, because I'm a very visual diagrammatic person and I love CMYK, I'm going to go with cyan. Okay, now I'm going to copy this. I'm actually just going to place it right here, and look what I can do. I can say 0.25. 0.25. Okay, now I've got two perfect squares. One is 1/8 of an inch. One is 1/4 of an inch, but I'm going to make this magenta. And then I could just, because I'm a curious cat, I'm going to make this 1.5. Okay, so now I'm just kind of sketching with digital software right now to get an idea of how well these subunit forms might work with this idea. So C, cyan, magenta, yellow, and of course K is black. K stands for black in CMYK. So the combination of these three colors in black, you can create any color in the printing world, right? And by the way, when you go and get cartridges for your Epson printer that you've probably got at home, they're always asking for C, M, Y, and K, cyan, magenta, yellow, and K meaning black. So just to kind of give you an idea how this printing business works, another reinforcement as far as the power of these colors in combination. It's really amazing. I love screen color. I love RGB, CMYK color patterns and color grading and trying to figure out the colors that work for a project that represent the symbolism or the mission or the client's needs, etc. So you always have to rationalize that business. Form follows function. Anyway, enough rhetoric for now. You can move these around and just see how this is going to work. What I'm going to do is I think this is too chunky. That's not going to work with the way that we've scaled. Again, that word scale. With the way that we've scaled these letter forms, I think the 1/2 inch is just too darn big. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use cyan for the top and magenta for the bottom, just because I like design systems and consistency. So now we're just going to intuitively, this could take a while, all right? I'm not gonna, so I'm just copying, pasting, and I might even select a lot of them. And I'm just going to intuitively start bitmapping this typeface to represent my name. Yeah, this could take a while. Another way that we could do it, I wonder, let's try a different approach. Just bear with me for a second. I'm going to move this layer below. And then check this out. I'm just going to build out this huge array of letters. I can just copy and paste, and we're going to have a lot of extra stuff to delete, but instead of being additive, I'm going to approach this project as from a reductive perspective. All right. Again, those are process decisions, which will interestingly enough affect the outcome. Of course, it's really important that all of these little subdivisions are perfectly just spot on. And you can also nudge them around with your key. Okay, I need to, that is incorrect. So I'm going to move this over here temporarily. I'm going to delete that layer. So see, sometimes you learn these things just by using the software and becoming familiar with the software. And then you're able to move through this process comfortably, I guess is the right way. Okay, we need one more row. So I'm going to copy one row, copy, boom, 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 nudge it up, holding shift. Okay. Before I start my reductive process, you know what I want to do? Copy. Oh my God, isn't Illustrator beautiful? And the grid, I don't know what's better. Well, obviously the grid is more important. because it's timeless. I don't know if Illustrator is timeless. Okay, I'm going to save for my, honestly, for my mental health, because I don't want to lose my work. All right, and I'm going to start chiseling away. You know, I can just start getting rid of this information. But you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to save this work that I've done. I'm going to move it down here. Obviously that's not going to work. I forgot the scale is different. Whoops. So of course I'm working really intuitively, but you know what? That's the beauty of Illustrator and digital applications. No harm done. You know, we're just kind of, we're enjoying the process and the software. So let's start carving. Again, you can change. If I put these layers on top, obviously I obstruct the original precedent, and that's why I have it on the bottom. So just kind of keep that in mind. And also, I kind of want to be able to see the grid with the cyan as well. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to select all of that cyan. You can see that it's selected here. See how it's highlighted? That's good, of course. But I'm going to change that opacity temporarily to 50%. There we go. Now I can kind of see the grid. You know, I can see everything. Look at that. Oops, not the pen tool. We're looking for the selection tool. And I'm just going to, you guys, I'm going to move relatively quickly. And I'm going to carve out you're just going to have to use your own judgment. I think that's going to do it. Huh. There's no right or wrong way to do this, by the way. I'm just moving intuitively. And again, I trust that the grid is going to give me some decent results. The only other thing I would be concerned about is that with this particular M, we want it to mirror, okay? We want that balance to occur. Otherwise, it'll be a little disappointing. And although it's not exactly, you know, if we really wanted the mirror, we would have nudged it over so that this guy is right there. But again, you know, we're just, I know those details are important, but I'm trying to just kind of walk through this with you guys quickly. But this incident may have been a concern if I were doing this for a client or if I were doing this at an extremely rigorous level. That is not the case today because I'm trying to illustrate a point for the most part. I'm obviously not going to need any of these. So I'm getting rid of this information. Okay, and I think I actually want to keep, I might want to keep that. I'm not exactly sure yet. Okay, let's move intuitively. Keep going. Keep going. Carving away, carving away. Huh. Now, just out of curiosity, let's make this go away for a moment. Okay, we're starting to see the bitmap typeface that we're building. Oops. Hmm. I love this kind of stuff. It's just visual thinking. You guys can hear me thinking on the back end here of YouTube land. Okay, we don't need this. We need any of that. Any of that. Progress here. Huh. Don't need that. Okay, let's go down here. Just carving, carving, carving. Not sure about that. That's a difficult move. I'm gonna remove this information before I attack that one. I think that one needs to stay. My gut is telling me, I think it's the balance that I'm trying to create here. And in fact, look at this one needs to go as well. So if I'm following these rules, I would have to get rid of, if I'm not mistaken, those guys. It's not going to be perfect. You know, ironically, and I know this is crazy to say this out loud, but sometimes perfection in design is overrated. You know, design can be expressive and non-machined and more human. All right. That definitely has to go. I think I need to keep these two below. Okay. All right, I think I'm relatively. Okay, let's make this go away temporarily. So yeah, that's definitely a bitface, bitmap typeface. Obviously, oh, we missed one up here. That's not doing anything for us. Okay, let's move on to this. We don't need any of those. We can just delete those. Okay, we're just kind of carving away efficiently. Okay, we don't have, we can kind of come back to things a little bit later. Following my intuition. Keep moving. Productive. For my mental health, Command S for save, in case things crash, right? Okay, and we are still carving. I think that was a mistake. So Command Z for undo. It's too much, yeah. Okay, let's. What do you think? I like that. By the way, you know, I'm using block colors, but what happens with this typeface when you use a gradient or when you use multiple colors? I don't know. So you can explore this project and be expressive in that manner, however you choose, as long as it's quote unquote bitmap and grid based. I'm going to bring the letter back so I can carve these T's. This is pretty easy, right? Yeah. This will go relatively quickly. Yeah, like this kind of reminds me of old Nintendo games that I used to play, like Double Dragon. I think that Lupton talks about that aesthetic briefly in the book too. the way that typeface designers were trying to meet typeface design with the nature of the context of a screen, which was pixelated, right? But now screens can do much, much more. So that has kind of been lost in a sense, or it's less priority. I'm gonna go with this move right there. So I'm gonna leave a little bit of sliver. Again, that's my intuition. In fact, I love this offset printing style that's happening too. That's a real nice kind of design move that could be useful for a poster, a publication poster down the road, perhaps. Anyway, I'm gonna continue the carve. Again, while we're doing this, we have absolute and utmost respect for the grid, because look at how it is solving problems for us. I mean, we could twiddle our thumbs and wonder all day long, well, what is the solution to this design problem, when in fact the grid is showing us very, very clearly. Let's start. Okay, and that's at a 1/8 inch square grid scale. So I'm drinking coffee. So let's go down here, and I'm going to continue doing this project all the way through for you all, because I think it is, again, we're trying different, the first idea or first method, it's always a good idea to have a couple cards up your sleeve. I think that's good for your own growth as a designer, but it's also good to show a client multiple design solutions that they might be interested in. And so that's why I'm actually really interested in solving this problem at 2 different scales. But it is going to be a little bit of work, but obviously with the computer software, it's really not intense work. I mean, it's not bad. Just kind of, oops, select all. Yeah, I'm trying to work smarter, not harder here, and move this process along. In fact, this can go down. Well, I want to pay respect to the grid. So the way that these subdivisions fall into the primary grid as well. So yeah, I think that's good. Anyway, moving that over. Now, there we go. And I'm nudging with arrow keys and holding shift to expedite this process. But I'm just creating this is a design system or framework that I'm sort of wrapping around the idea of this project. I have a little bit falling below. I'll solve that in a second. I'm not quite there yet. But yeah, I'm, design systems and grid-based thinking moves a design solution along pretty quickly. I need another layer down here, but I still want it to respect the primary and secondary grid system. All right, I think that's good for now. And a lot of this stuff, look, next thing we need to do is I want to see what's going on, so I'm going to reduce that opacity. But similarly, we can bump up the opacity back up for this one so we can actually see what's going on. Cool. Command S. Okay, now let's start carving. Now it's going to be a little bit different with this circumstance though. God, see, that's what I'm worried about. This whole entire grid, leaving that for just this little sliver seems insane. So I'm not going to do it, honestly. Again, it's design intuition. You have to develop an eye for making design decisions quickly so that your boss isn't waiting around for 3 weeks for you to complete something, because make no mistake, you know, marketing is very, very fast. There's a lot of hustle bustle in a design office. You have to be ready to communicate clearly, both with your design, your words, your emails, all that good stuff. Okay, here we go. And now some difficult decisions are going to be made. Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult with this larger scale, but it's got to be done. It's got to be done. You know, I'm going to create a rule for myself. If there is any information within a grid, I'm going to keep it. So I got to put this one back. And I'm going to start there. And then if I have to, I'll continue to chop. So the only deletions that are currently going to occur are complete non-issues or non-content issues. And then I'll go from there. See, that has a little bit, might have to make an adjustment there. Oops, that's not right. I want just those two ribbons. This can go relatively quickly once you set up a design system. But if you're going to sit around all day and be like, oh, should I do this? Should no. You know, listen to your design system. Listen to the grid. You don't have time to. Maybe you have time. It's not an issue. Looks like we're good there. Let's get rid of some non-issues. That one is non. Yeah, that's there. Okay. To be a little bit more careful at this point. Scanning with my eyes here. Now let's hit Command S and let's just review what we're doing so far. We can remove the grid temporarily as well. Oops, look what I did. That needs to be 100. Interesting. I kind of like how this is not mirroring exactly. It feels like mechanical hand lettering somehow. So I actually like the way it's looking. And I'm gonna trust the fact that I like the way that it's looking. I wanted to show you guys one other thing before we stop this tutorial, and that's that you could, in fact, with the pen tool and with snap to grid on, you could create a triangulated system. Of course, you got to close that box, right? Okay. And let's change this one to 75. Sometimes I got to be honest, you know, no, it's not doing that right now. Okay, we're good. So the reason why I had this opacity set at 75 and this one at 100, so I can kind of see that relationship when I'm working. Sometimes you want a working diagram, a quote unquote project working diagram is sometimes really helpful for process. And then Like I can just kind of start setting up this system again that could be related to how you're deleting things within your word that you've chosen, but in a more interesting way. I mean, there are different modular forms that you could use. Of course, you could choose the ellipse tool and hold shift with your left pinky, right? Change the size a little bit while holding shift. Look at this. I mean, you can start. In fact, what happens? I'm a curious cat, so I'm just going to keep moving forward. What happens when you combine these two, right? So what happens if we zoom in a little bit and we use the ellipse tool, we create a very small circle that is cyan. And I've copied that so I can delete it. I'm going to come back down here. I think this is sort of interesting because then we start to combine. Look at that. So again, playing with design systems in the grid. Unfortunately, now we're starting to mix apples and oranges here. If I were really to do that, and I'm tempted to, gosh darn it. See, now I'm falling down a wormhole, a design wormhole, which I can't help but appreciate and respect. Now, I still want, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this really quickly, guys. Look at that. I'm kind of doing a more additive method this time around, right? Look at this, how we can just kind of create a design. It's kind of fun too, right? Of course, I mean, it's got to be fun. If it's not fun, then there are plenty of other things and careers to explore. It's got to be fun first. This is getting a little complicated, but we have to respect the system. We have to respect the grid. We cannot nudge this guy over. It'll just break. I mean, everything, design really is based off of these rules that you can learn and then manipulate, I suppose. But look at this. I can just kind of move things around. Yeah, okay. So anyway, I think that kind of illustrates the point as far as modularity. One thing I want to do really quickly is I'm going to make this go away and look at, if you have things on layers, you can kind of control what you're viewing and what you're seeing. I'm going to delete this. I don't need that but I think this example is really beneficial or useful for you moving forward. In fact, why do triangles have to be like that? I mean, you could also create, whoops, pen tool, boom, boom. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. I meant to do this. Okay. So again, these are just modular structural systems that you can develop. You might even do that in your sketchbook first, perhaps, to kind of figure out a good system. But, Illustrator really is beautiful because you can do a lot of thinking and sketching right in front of, just live, right then and there. So maybe this is another modular system that you could use. For your custom typeface. Delete, save. I'm going to make this, you've seen this, so you see the power of playing with two different scales and two different objects. Can remove that. That gets kind of interesting. And you got to consider how that might read on a page or on a screen. Or another thing we need to do, I'm going to lock this really quickly. And see how I locked this layer with the blue on it so it cannot be selected. I'm going to bump that back up to 100. Those colors on top of each other are quite a bit. So yeah, just keep in mind the way colors, some colors and color systems require more quote unquote work from our eyes and our minds to kind of read the information. So yeah, but that's a color theory observation that I'm making right now, as far as the contrast and the intensity and how easy or difficult it is for my eyes. And I think that's really important, of course, for the user, because we're constantly thinking about the client and the user as a designer. Okay, I think that's enough for today. I'm looking forward to see what you guys produce.